And welcome to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I actually, for the first time tonight, for my first show, I've got a panel of experts tonight with me. It's not just me. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down the panel, say who you are and which organization you're from. So we're going to start with this fine gentleman. What's your name, sir?
Great. My name's Ed Bonilla, and I'm with Middlesex United Way.
And what do you do for the United Way?
My title is Senior Director for Community Resources, and I oversee our fund distribution process, so the grants that we provide the community, and a lot of our community impact work, which is basically our community work, working with a lot of different collaboratives, a lot of different groups, looking at community issues, and so we do a lot of collaborative work throughout Middlesex County.
Very nice. And you there, madam? What's your name?
I'm Dawn Parker, and I'm a project manager from The Connection.
Okay.
So The Connection is, we originated in Middletown in 1972. Mm-hmm. We're a nonprofit. Excellent. And we provide human services throughout the state of Connecticut, and we do community development. So a lot like Ed, a big part of my job is collaborations in the community, discovering ways to build affordable and supportive housing.
Excellent. And you down at the end we've seen before, but for the viewers and listeners that don't know who you are there, madam.
I'm Sarah Bird. I'm the Executive Director for Middlesex Habitat. I oversee the trajectory path of where we're going.
Okay.
I work, our job is to eradicate affordable housing or try to work with other nonprofit organizations. I work directly with the families. I do advocacy work, all sorts of great things.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we're here tonight. We're going to talk. We're going to have a very lively conversation. Let's see. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about Alice. That's right. We didn't introduce.
Yeah, you didn't introduce.
I was going to say we didn't introduce Alice. What's wrong with me?
This is our friend Alice, and you might know Alice because Alice lives in all of our communities. You might be Alice. You might know Alice. You may have been Alice.
Okay.
Alice is a household that is asset limited, income constrained, yet employed in the state of Connecticut. So she is about one out of 3 households in our state.
Really? Mm-hmm. Wow. Ed, do you know about Alice?
Yes.
I was going to say, you probably know a lot about
quite
Alice.
a bit about Alice.
Well,
Alice is a United Way initiative. And so, I've been working very closely with Dawn and Sarah and many others throughout the community, the Shoreline Basic Needs Task Force, which is how we came with this initiative and to bring Alice along to different events and venues just like this.
Right.
And Alice, United Way's got together, and we've been, everybody's talking about people are struggling financially.
Right.
And we know that we have poverty issues and we have data around poverty, but we know there's a very large percentage of people in our communities who are struggling, who don't fall in that poverty category because they work. As Dawn mentioned, people are working maybe 2 part-time jobs. They're just not making enough to make ends meet, especially in Connecticut where there's a high cost of living. So there was a United Way in New Jersey that put together this Alice study working with Rutgers University. Okay. So all the United Ways in Connecticut got together and we partnered with Rutgers University to do this study. And I actually have the booklet here.
You have the study.
I have the study here. It's only 100 some odd pages, some leisure reading. But it's actually a lot of really good information. It's just not data. It's a lot of good information around what the data means and what the issues are, and what could be some potential solutions. So it actually is a lot of good information. Okay. So as Dawn mentioned, ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. So it's folks who really they're just making ends meet. They're above the federal poverty level, which we know is very low, and they're making less than what's called a survival budget or cost of living threshold. Okay. So those are the basic things that you need, the basic costs that you need to make ends meet in Connecticut. For a family of 4, just to give you an example, let's see, 2 adults, 2 children right here, it's about $53,150, and it's a very conservative estimate. So with this report saying if you make between the federal poverty level and you're making under or up to $53,150, you're struggling to make ends meet. You can't pay your bills all the time. You might be living week to week, month to month, and you're at risk of any one emergency that comes up, a car repair, needed car repair, or a medical expense that's not covered, to be pushed even further back. Then you're scrambling even more. So these are folks who are on the fringe, at the edge. I would say actually folks who are above that level to a certain degree are struggling as well, because Connecticut is a very high cost of living.
Right.
So United Way got together with Rutgers to say, let's try to put some numbers around this, put a face to it. And so we came up with some estimates based on this report, and the data says that about 20% of folks in Middlesex County are ALIS, and statewide about 25% of folks are ALIS.
Really?
So that's a large percentage, and I think that, again, that's a conservative estimate, so I would say it's even larger than that.
Okay.
But those are folks who are working, they're working retail, they're working at jobs that make our communities go. They're folks that work early care teachers, childhood daycare teachers are ALIS. They're not making much money.
Right.
Folks who are working in nursing homes, folks who are working in security.
Yeah.
Again, our Stop and Shops, our supermarkets, those folks are out. They're working very hard, but they're just not making enough to make ends meet in the economy that we live in.
Right.
So this report focuses on them and the issues that they face, and the issues and the problems. I mean, if you don't make enough now and you don't get ahead, you can't save any money. And again, you can't save any money for emergencies, let alone to get ahead. So then if you have children, your children aren't going to succeed most likely if you're struggling as well, because it is one of those things that does carry on to your children. The stress, when you're living day to day like that, the stress really affects you and how you go about your day, and maybe how you parent. Not that people are mean, but people are struggling and people are stressed. So it's a very large issue, and Connecticut has a very large percentage of our population who are ALIS.
Wow.
And it's as Dawn said earlier in her comments, you might be ALIS, you might know ALIS.
Right.
I think when people hear this, they realize, wow, I'm ALIS, I'm struggling. And I think a lot of people are too proud or afraid to tell other people that they're struggling.
Right.
And a lot of people try to figure it out on their own, and they don't reach out for help. But I think a lot of us are ALIS, have been ALIS. We have ALIS in our families. I mean, in our communities, there's ALIS all over the place. Throughout our daily life, you go out and get a cup of coffee, whoever serves you the coffee is probably ALIS.
Exactly.
Go out to eat at a restaurant, hotels. Those folks that are working there are working really hard, trying to get as many hours as they can, because they just need to pay their bills.
Exactly. Dawn, is there something you'd like to add to what Ed said?
What Ed was saying is the reason that Shoreline Basic Needs Task Force sort of started a few years ago, Patty Dowling and the soup kitchens and pantries, were really noticing that there was a new population that was coming for help. And that population were people who are working. And the numbers are extremely high right now at the pantries for the 10 towns that they serve. So they got involved at thinking, what is going on and what can we do?
Correct.
So in the Shoreline Basic Needs Task Force, there's 3 focus areas, one of which is affordable housing, another is household income, and the third focus that we have a committee for is food security.
Okay.
So we sort of have broken up. We're advocating and educating on those 3 topics throughout our 10 towns.
Okay.
So luckily, honestly, the ALIS report came along, and that's like a great platform for the discussion, because we have numbers and we have data, and of course then it proves your point to people in the community.
I think it's great for areas that people don't associate with poverty.
Right.
So when you think about Westbrook, Westbrook poverty I think is like 3% or something. So people say, oh, Westbrook doesn't have a problem. But the report shows that 31%, and again, that's a conservative number, are ALIS.
Right.
So you can begin to tell the story. You could say, yeah, we don't have a high poverty number, but we have a lot of people who are financially struggling. So I think this report really helps areas
helps
like
show,
this, like the Shoreline. And the Shoreline Basic Needs Task Force has really taken this report, and they're really doing some great things with it, advocating, educating the public, because there's not a lot of resources for ALIS, because ALIS is making too much money to qualify for the subsidies and the assistance that is out there. So the food assistance, the housing assistance.
Right.
And with the ALIS report,
Sure.
Ed spoke about using the information. It helps to pinpoint where your greatest needs are in Middlesex County. Well, for us, and we can only speak to what we're doing as a task force.
Okay.
But to be able to look at that and say, okay, well, in Killingworth, you're at 10%, so maybe right now the focus isn't necessarily in Killingworth, but at other places where you have a high percentage, because if you're at 25% as a state, 20 in Middlesex County, but how many are in there?
30,
Over
31,
Yeah.
like in Westbrook, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple that go over that 25%. And, for those of us who are working in advocacy and the nonprofit arena, we can look at that and say, this is where we need to put our resources into because there's a great need there.
Yeah, I think really, too, this has given us a reason to meet with town officials, legislators,
Right.
zoning departments. There's a lot of tools that our towns can use that we're trying to help, provide technical support to encourage ways to build affordable housing that fits into our communities so that it's very planful for each individual town.
Okay. Now, how all the information that you gathered for the report, how long did that take?
That was working with a committee at the statewide level,
Okay.
and that probably took a good several months of working together because Rutgers had done it before,
Right.
so they were replicating it, so they had a formula, and then they came back with their data,
Yeah.
and then ran it by all the United Ways that were represented at the table. So
Yeah.
then we can go back and forth a little bit and question it a little bit. So they really did a nice job, and they're actually going to replicate it. They're going to do it again, I think, towards the end of this year. So we're going to have some follow-up data so we can see what trends there are.
What type of trends do you think there are, and what type of trends do you think there could be?
I don't think the situation's getting any better.
Okay.
I would assume that either it'll be pretty consistent or we're going to see it get worse. I don't see it getting better. If you look at our trends, our unemployment rate may have gone down, but the jobs are not high paying, they're very low paying.
Right.
So it's actually, I don't want to say creating moralis, but it's keeping folks in that income level if it's those types of jobs. So I think if this data is going to be very important to help us tell our story. We have this initial report. I think when we do this next report, we have trends. I think that's going to make our story even stronger when we talk to people because we can say, look, over time, we're not addressing it and it's getting worse.
Right.
Right.
Done.
I think one thing that we promote as well when we're talking about Alice is that there's no money on some golden tree in our backyard to fix this problem. So it's like really trying to have people say, I know who you're talking about,
Right.
and they're people who are surrounding me, and I want to be a compassionate, caring neighbor for them. And so then it might just be things that you can do in your everyday that really are not about giving somebody money to fix their problem.
Right.
But it could be, if you have a neighbor and you can help that person get their child on the bus so that they can get to work an hour earlier, then that helps that person not having to pay for childcare. Or if you're an employer, there's some really good employers who do some flexible scheduling and accommodate for things, like people who have to take public transportation, for example. There's a need for some flexibility with that.
Yeah.
And there's some employers who really are standing out in the crowd to say, it's not going to cost us anything to be flexible, but it helps us to have that employee at our jobs.
Exactly. Would you guys mind sticking around for another segment?
Oh, we love it.
We'll be right back.
Todd's a great guy. I mean, look at him. What a sweetheart. Attaboy. Wait, Todd, what are you doing? How totally selfish and un-Todd-like of you. Come on, Todd. Come on, man.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you. Getting that college education? What are you gonna do? Graduate and take some office job? Be like everybody else?
Or will you dare do something different?
Like, be a teacher. You could be my teacher. You got the skills.
The smarts?
Yes, you. You could be the teacher I never forget.
That'd be cool.
Does that corporate job even have recess? What are you gonna make of yourself?
What are you gonna make of me?
And welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. Sitting here with the panel of experts we're talking about the ALICE program and all that other fun stuff. I'm going to have you guys reintroduce yourselves again. Sir?
Ed Bonilla from Middlesex United Way.
Dawn Parker from The Connection.
And Madam on the end?
Sarah Bird from Middlesex Habitat for Humanity.
All right. Ed, we're actually going to pick up a little bit before we get going again, pick up where we left off. Mm-hmm. The report is available online if people want to go and download it all or peruse and take a look at it.
Yep, the report's available on our website.
Yeah.
So you go to middlesexunitedway.org.
Yeah.
And you click, there's up on the bar there, Alice, you click on it, it'll bring you right to the report.
Okay.
And you can scroll through it. As I said, it's about 100 some odd pages.
Yeah.
And what's good about the report is, well, it talks about statewide data information. There's actually countywide data, and there's actually data for each specific town. So you can go in there and say, okay, I live in this town, and look for your town there, and you can just download and print the information that you want. So that's a really good feature about this
Really?
report, that
Cool.
it gives you down to each town as well, but statewide level.
Excellent. And so what did we want to pick up the conversation about, talk about to open this segment?
Well, I think with Alice, you know, again, it's a great education tool, a great awareness tool, but
Right.
We talk about things that you can do as a community. So Dawn referenced being a compassionate neighbor. I think
Right.
at the basic level, we can be caring people. We can recognize that when people are struggling, we can lend a hand in a way, as Dawn said. How can you help other people? And I think that's at the basic level. At United Way, and again, Dawn referenced business employers.
Right.
So we're reaching out to employers, looking for those employers who are compassionate, who are doing some things
Right.
to help some of their employees, because employers want a good workforce.
Oh, yeah.
And they want a stable workforce. And so if they do some things to help their workforce, then they don't have turnover, and they'll have a healthier employee who maybe isn't worrying as much about childcare or transportation. But then there's housing, and these folks actually focus on the housing, and there's some strategies around that.
Yeah,
let's talk about that.
I think when you look at someone's budget,
Yep.
the largest amount you're going to spend is for your housing.
Yes.
Housing in our area is really expensive.
Right.
And I mean really expensive, like $1,200 plus, where Alice families should, you know, they're estimated to be paying about $700 a month.
Okay.
We don't have housing that's available in those. When we're talking about this report, it's not really hitting our 10 towns, the housing availability. So something that we're doing is we are engaging like the decision makers in the towns, the planning and zoning departments.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tools like the Incentive Housing Zone Program, which is a state of Connecticut grant that towns can apply for. And they can look at their town and say, denser housing is lower cost, whether it's home ownership or rental, it's lower cost. Our towns are very cookie cutter. They need acreage for single family housing. That's like what we like to do. So the incentive housing zone allows the towns to plan within their town where would density work for them and where would it be successful. So not all of our 10 towns have taken advantage of the incentive housing zone grant. So that's like number one, what we're trying to do is encourage the towns to do that project. And then the next thing that we're doing, like with that incentive housing zone, if a property is selected, there's another $50,000 grant that can dig deeper to making it closer to actual production of housing. Right. So that's one thing.
Okay.
Another thing is accessory apartments. They offer a nice little nugget of affordable housing to people too. So a lot of towns have rules and regulations about that, and they're all over the board. Some towns have as-of-right accessory apartments, so people can just build them with the design standards. So we're encouraging towns to have accessory apartments be available as a norm instead of like having regulations that it has to be like for a family member or some kind of real restrictive use. We're also encouraging
Yes, okay,
people,
go.
if they have land that they own, that we could cut off a section of their land and do something like a habitat house on that property.
Sure.
So there's a donation kind of incentive there that we're talking to people about. The probate judge talks with families who are settling estates and sort of sharing that as a possibility. We have landowners. We just, need little segments of that
Right.
land to try to help the situation. So single family, habitat's definitely like working on some of those type of projects.
Absolutely. And then we also talk about, for the families the Alice families that may own their own homes,
Yeah.
but are finding themselves in situations where there are critical needs in the home that they can't address. So we talk about the Brush with Kindness program, where it's for homeowners who have needs, where we will go in. It's a no interest loan. They pay back over time, but with the help of volunteers and the resources, we'll go in and fix some of those smaller projects. So we talk about that and just letting people know that, if you have a neighbor or know someone who have these needs, there are resources available. And outside of Habitat, there's also USDA grants for low-income permanent housing, as well as grants for home repairs. So, and there's actually, no, I'm sorry, not grants, there's loans, and then there's grants if you're over the age of 62, because that's another thing in Middlesex County. We have a older population, so there are these grants available. So we discuss the different types of services that are available that not a lot of people know about. So it's important that we get that word out there, so if there are issues, people know that they can come to, there are resources available to them.
Yeah, and we're trying to work with towns also on trying to figure out like ways that they can create their own revolving loan funds to help the residents of their community with those improvements, or with building an accessory apartment, or some way to help secure. You can't develop your way out of this problem. Like, we really have to look at what we have and preserve what we have, and encourage people to evaluate. Like, so one of the things we ask people to do is, if you're a landlord of housing,
Right.
and you have the application from someone and they are a good tenant on paper, and you've met them and they seem like a great fit, but their money is not adding up to the amount that you want to rent that apartment for, consider lowering the rent. If, say, you want $1,200 and that person would be more successful at $1,000,
Right.
look at that $200 and say, can I reduce the rent in exchange for the lawn care or the snow removal or something else? Because it's about the money coming in and the money going out. So just in that little bit, I mean, we have landlords who look at things that way in the community. Those things make a huge difference for people.
And I think when you're talking about community, one of the things that we talk about is that we live and work in communities where people can't afford to live and work in those communities. So if you have, the barista at Starbucks can't afford to live in Old Saybrook, so they're traveling to be there. But if they could live in the community that they're working in, what does that mean for the community? What kind of impact is that going to make? I mean, if they own their own home, now you have another taxpayer. But if they have a family, then you have someone who can participate in their child's school. They're available for them to join the Little League or football or cheerleading. But you also have more people that can do volunteer work, like volunteer firemen. I mean, what will happen when you have aging communities without young people coming in and services with nobody to fill those slots?
Right.
I think you hit upon a good point too, Sarah, when you're talking about the affordability and being able to keep people in town who work in town. And I think that's important for families, because a lot of people, their children can't afford, they're not finding the jobs where then they can afford to live in the same town they grew up or the town close by. So it's actually ripping families apart. I mean, how, we read stories and we hear about younger people not only leaving the area but the state, looking for work and affordable housing, and then that creates a stress when they're moving their kids away from the grandparents. I mean, so that could be a choice. People should have the choice, but it shouldn't be something that they need to do, and they should have the choice if they want to move away or stay close to home.
Right.
But folks, and especially in this area, it's just too expensive for some folks to stay here.
Right.
And so it's not healthy for our families, not healthy for our communities. As Sarah said, our communities, we are an aging population in Connecticut, and I've talked to some different school districts actually throughout Middlesex County, and the number of kids is shrinking. I mean, schools are like consolidating classrooms, not because of the budget. I mean, in some instances the budget, but in some instances they're like, we only had about 10 births last year in the whole town. It's like,
Holy cow.
Yeah, that's not good.
Region 4, it's a conversation. I live in Chester, and we have very small class sizes, and that's like a real conversation that needs to happen, because we don't do teaching for multiple levels by one teacher, so we're going to have to figure something out when there's not young families who are living in our towns.
Comes back to the economy, comes back to housing, and so it's only going to get worse if we don't address this in some manner.
Exactly. Sarah, you have something you'd like to add?
No, actually, I have a little bit of a story. Ever since we have started doing our dinner and conversation, I can't tell you the amount of people that I've met either through conversation at them or talking with someone afterwards or letting people know, like, oh, I have the first Thursday, this is what I'm doing. And the amount of people that have said how drastically their lives have changed since the downturn in the economy. So I think that, when people think of poverty or they think about an Alice, they may think of maybe someone who's not educated, but I think that since there has been such a downturn in the economy, you have a lot of people who are underemployed that have gone from being middle class to upper middle class that have become Alice's over the last 7 to 10 years.
Okay.
It's the relativity of your income to your debt. Okay. And so like the Alice report, what we try to tell people too is the Alice report doesn't take into consideration debt. And yet we are great educators. So we have a huge number of people who are college educated and have college debt. We also have people who, like Sarah had said, may have had a different position economically before the downturn, and they sort of borrowed for some time, and now the debt is being repaid, which is a burden on that household as well. So that's where we say the Alice numbers are greater than the report shows,
It's a
for
very
sure.
conservative estimate.
Okay.
So I think it's greater, and I believe we're wrapping up, but I think I think going back to, I think we've shared a lot of information here.
We have, hopefully.
But if anything anybody can do at the most basic level, it's that compassion.
Absolutely.
I think we always like to leave that with people. Like, what can you do for your neighbors? What can you do for coworkers? Sometimes it's the simplest gesture that can really make a difference in someone's life.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you guys for coming down. Hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, definitely.
Have a good night.
You too.